Hey, Joe Gilder here. I want to dive into these drum tracks we recorded at my studio for my EP. And in this video, I want to talk to you about something that I'm not honestly super excited to share with you, but I want to. As soon as I discovered this mistake, this problem, I knew I wanted to share it with you because it's a dumb mistake, and hopefully I can help you avoid making it. But it also just shows that, it just happens. Mistakes happen. You overlook something and it ends up messing something up. And so I want to talk about kind of major, massive mistake that I made and let you hear it, explain what happened, how it happened, and how I can maybe avoid it in the future, and then how I'm going to deal with it. Because I have a few options, and love to hear your thoughts on it as well. So this is the song Trade. Let me just find a chorus real quick. I should have used more markers. Here we go.
Let's make a trade, my truth for your lies. Let's make a trade, my lows for your highs. Let's make a trade.
So I'm happy with the drum sound. I dig it. As raw drums go, with a little bit of EQ on a few tracks, it's working okay for me. Here's the part I don't relish telling you about. The snare top. If we even just zoom in and look, you can already, maybe, if you're familiar with audio, you can probably tell something is amiss here. What do you notice when you look at this waveform? I'm talking about this big green one right here. What I notice is it is very, very spiky. Now, yes, snare drums are supposed to be somewhat spiky, but let's look at the bottom snare mic. It's not going to be as spiky as the top snare, but look, it's an actual, there's a spike and it trails off. And then you look at the actual snare, and look, it's way spikier and goes away way sooner. Now, do I care what the waveform looks like? No, but as you'll hear as I solo this and play it, something went terribly, terribly wrong. Oh, it's painful. It's painful. I'm thinking of deleting this video as soon as I'm done recording it, but I'm not. And I've shared this before. I know that it is tempting to, especially when you run a YouTube channel and you've got a decent number of people following you, to want to present your best and to present everything as, here's all the wonderful things I did. But sometimes they're not wonderful. Sometimes you make dumb mistakes like this snare drum track, and I want to just show you, not really going to show you that I'm human. Hopefully we all know I'm human, but just show you it's okay. It stinks, and I'm upset about it, and I wish it hadn't happened, but it's okay, and it happens. And I'm going to share this with you, just like I'm going to share the victories of when this song is finally released and it sounds awesome. We're going to, virtual high five, and it's going to be great. But you'll know a little bit more. You'll be a little more in tune with how this song and this album and EP went, because you knew that I got this snare tone after the day after tracking day. Now, you don't have to be super experienced to know that sucks. Now, I've done mixes before where I've tried to get that sound to blend in with the original snare to make it sound snappier, but that was just bad. So here's what happened. Recorded through, here, let's go on a little adventure. Let's open up our browser, and I'll show you exactly the gear that I use. So I had a typical SM57 on the top of, let's go to Sweetwater, 57 on top of the snare, position, decent, not too close, a little bit farther away so it captures some body, and I decided to run it through my ADL 700, which was my nicest preamp channel strip. It's no longer available on Sweetwater. Whoa. PreSonus, ADL, did they stop making it? Because I saw discontinued there. They worked on that for years just to get it out, and now it's discontinued. That's crazy. Anyway, it's this. So really cute-looking box that has a tube preamp, really nice tube preamp. It has a compressor, and it has EQ. So we're getting levels. We're setting levels. I've got things set up, and it's sounding pretty good. So I just set levels first, and I'm digging it. And then I decide to kick on the EQ, and I do a little EQ to make it sound a little fatter, and boost a little bit of the lows, cut a little bit of that 300 hertz range that was sounding kind of wonky. This is after moving the mic one time to make it sound a little better to begin with. And then I said, let's put a little compression on there. So I dialed in the compressor and had a pretty, these knobs right here, had a pretty fast attack, a little bit faster release. Set the threshold about, the ratio about there, so pretty high. And then set the threshold about there-ish and had the gain about there. So I had it kind of like this picture. And, looking at the gain reduction meter, I had the meter there set to show me if there was compression happening, and there was. And the whole time I was listening to the entire kit. So he was playing, and I had all the faders up, balanced, and I was listening to how everything sounded. So the snare, to me, sounded good. And when I did this compression, it got a little snappier. Here's the problem. I was listening to the entire kit. I didn't solo that snare and just listen to that. I also didn't record it down and play back and solo just to hear that one snare to make sure everything sounded right. I did it all in context. Now, when it comes to mixing and most things musical, it's good to do things in context. It's good to not obsess about how the snare sounds in solo and listen to it in context with the entire mix. That's a good thing. But not in this instance. When you're mixing, great. But in this instance, where I got to make sure that snare is going to tape properly, I failed. I should have soloed it and listened through while he was playing, or I should have recorded it and listened back and soloed every single track to make sure it sounded good. And then I could go back and listen to everything. So that was the big fail. So what did I do? I essentially just overcompressed. I used too much compression, and it literally just let a tiny little the spike through, and the rest of it got clamped down, and so I just lost all tone of that snare. Okay? And the end result was this. Now, why didn't I notice that? Why didn't I hear that? Other than the fact, like I said, I didn't solo it and listen. Why would that not be more obvious in the full, during the session? Well, here's the reason. The good news, if there's a silver lining to this crappy rain cloud, it's that everything else sounded really good. So here's the overall drum recording. This is what we were listening to. So I had good snare sound in the overheads. I had decent snare even in the bathroom. It's kind of the sound you want in the bathroom for a snare. The snare bottom sounded pretty good. And then the fat mic obviously made everything sound good. So the point is, it was sounding good. Everyone in the room who were people with good ears who would know if it didn't notice it. Am I sharing the blame? No, it's totally my fault. But the good news is we did a good job getting things like overheads and rooms sounding good, that they carried the weight of my really, really crappy snare drum recording. And yes, it's like this on every song we did. So, what are some of the solutions? If you find yourself with this problem, what do you do? Well, obviously, one solution is to re-record. That's not going to happen. He's already loaded his drums out of here. He's a busy guy, and I can't do that. So, what are some other solutions? Well, the obvious one that everyone is going to say first is to just do sample replacement, to get something like Steven Slate Trigger. And if ever there was a track that was perfect for triggering, it's this one. It's very, very spiky. There's no question as to exactly where the snare hits are happening. So it would be easy enough to trigger a nice snare sample, blend it in with everything else. My buddy Sam said I should bring the snare drum back in here and sample that actual snare, and then use that in a sample replacement situation so I have a very real representation of what the actual snare sounded like. That's an option. I doubt I'll do that just because I'm pressed for time. So the main option is to replace the snare, or to add a sample, to use it to trigger a good sounding snare drum sample to augment the crappy one that's here. The other solution is to simply just leave it alone and make up for it with the overhead and the room mics. That's going to be hard because if we need the snare to be more prominent, we're not going to be able to just pull the snare out of the overheads and just turn that up. It's going to be the overall sound of the kit. Thankfully, he hits the snare really hard, so it's going to be nice and loud in whatever mic we're listening to, but it's still not a super great solution. My current solution, until I decide about the sample replacing, which I wouldn't be surprised if I end up doing that. However, I've never done that before. I've always wanted to work with what I have, but here's a situation where I jacked it up so bad I might have to resort to some sort of sample replacing. But here's what's kind of cool. So here is the bottom snare mic. I used a SOM50, which is it's a small diaphragm condenser, but it just put it under the snare, and I had it probably a good 6 inches away from the snare itself because I wanted it to capture some low end. I wanted it to be a thick sounding, so it's not just the of the snares. It actually had the sound of the drum. So thankful I did that because the bottom snare by itself actually sounds pretty good. So it sounds like a bottom snare, but it's got some ring to it. It's got some body. You can hear there's some frequencies in there that we can use. So this is what I've done thus far, just having listened to it and tried to make it sound a little more passable. I've gone in and done some pretty jacked up EQing on the bottom snare mic to give it more body. I mean, a huge 18 dB boost down at 140 hertz. Take out some ringing and cut the top end down just a little bit so it's not so bright. And to be honest, it actually, as surprised as I am, it sounds pretty good. So here's that. Here's the before, and then I'll kick on the EQ. So when I kicked up all the low frequencies, it kind of made this frequency ring out. So I took that out, so it's not quite so obvious. Suddenly, that actually sounds like a snare. It's a little on the brighter side, right? It's the wrong side of the snare drum, but it's got a decent amount of body to where you combine it with the crappy snare, and then add in the overhead, the bathroom mic, and the fat mic. All that to say, we're to a passable snare tone now, which before we didn't have that because all we had was the stupid snappy sounding one. So, lessons learned, just don't use compression if you're not able to pay attention to it and make sure it's working well, because you can't undo it. I've said that all the time. I didn't follow my own stinking advice. Another lesson, listen back to what you recorded before you go and record 5 songs of it. Double check everything to make sure everything's routed right and sounding right. And having a few extra mics paid off in this instance. I've recorded drums before where we took the bottom snare mic and used it somewhere else, and then I would have been really up a creek. But having that bottom snare mic and positioning it well left me with at least some sort of a way to salvage this, at least for the time being. So I'm not big on teaching you how to salvage things. Obviously, my mantra is to get it right at the source. Here's where I didn't get it right at the source. There are many areas of this session where I did get it right. Good players, good miking, good gear on everything. But this one track, I failed. And it's going to be an adventure to see how I end up handling it in the final version of this song. So stick around, stay tuned for that. Otherwise, if you want to leave judgmental comments below, feel free. I deserve it.